Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about um, the transformation of jurisprudence, the practice of law in the West. Now, this has been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, and there's been a number of if you like, reviews in the United States on various legal studies departments in a number of universities. Not the Ivy League ones, although I'm sure there's some around for that, but more the sort of lower end of the second tier, upper end of the third tier of colleges. But some of these, if you do the full course, some of these colleges still want $250,000 for doing the legal course. So this is not an occupation for the, or not a course rather for the poor. This is something that really only wealthy people can afford. And it's interesting that they're pushing the activist thing so hard in these legal studies. Now, I first came across this in when this is 25 years ago. I first saw the danger signs, where I noticed the judges that they were hiring into the divorce courts were rabid activists, as in placard waving activists, activists for saying that all women are oppressed, and pushing hard the gender conflict sort of narrative back in the day, which was outrageously exaggerated and largely invented, and also it was ideological, because if you looked at the stats at the time and now, let alone then, nearly all the violent behaviour that they raved and railed about was in non-white neighbourhoods and societies. But they projected as an ideological one, where really it was only those evil straight white Christian males that were doing it. And so again, it was very ideological, and these judges were hired for their ideological views. You couldn't get that many ideological hacks in one in one hiring. That they had to know in advance that these people were ideological and were hired specifically for that reason. Otherwise, you'd have a random selection. You have an ideological fanatic here and a rules of evidence guy there, but instead it was all the fanatics. So that's what alerted me too. But what further alerted me was the amount of lawyers and activists in and around this divorce law thing. That there were rabid activist lawyers and the social workers, the psychologists, the entire industry was filled with activists, and activists flocked to this gender conflict fault line with great glee, because the outcomes were guaranteed to be anti-male and pro-female, so they could rejoice in the good work they were, as they would see it, doing. But what intrigued me the most in the court, and I went sort of sat in on a few sessions, was how the rule of law, the due legal process, rules of evidence was completely suspended. It didn't exist. Decisions were made ideologically, and again, this is even 25 years ago. So the decisions were purely ideological. Him, evil, bad oppressor; her, helpless victim. Him must pay compensation. She must receive compensation. It really didn't get much outside of that sort of ideological prism, and it rather intrigued me. And so I tried to engage a few of them, the lawyers and so on. Later on, the judges, not at the time, but lawyers in discussion. And have you ever heard of the Inquisition? And I'd go through various periods in history where there'd been massive subversions of the rule of law and due legal process. And they know, you don't study that at university. No. Separation of powers, how the Cromwell heavied the Privy Council of the Parliament to agree to the beheading of the king at the time, in the English Civil War and that sort of stuff. So they didn't cover any of these things and seemed to be blissfully unaware of it. And already then that there were lecturers and professors of law that perceived that the law was a device that should be used to create social change. The idea of evidence and rule, the rules of procedures, and this was all by the by. And this was no. If we maintain the rule of law and due legal process, rules of evidence, then we can't affect the social change we want, that we ideologically yearn for. So the ideological social change we want is the primary sort of driving force here. And so if we have to dispense with the rule of law and the due legal process, evidence, all that sort of stuff, then that's fine, because we're pursuing a greater, higher purpose. Now, I was absolutely stunned when I first saw this. I just couldn't believe it. I remember walking around a bit of a daze for a while, and I was so alarmed by it, and so brazen and blatant was this subversion of due legal process that I wrote a paper about and went to my local parliamentarian, and both state and federal, and raised this, saying, hey, because I thought if they knew this was happening, they'd stop it. It was beyond my comprehension that they would agree with this or that they would allow it to continue. The only reason it was happening is because they didn't know. It was my very naive understanding of it then, because these are elected representatives. They won't tolerate. If they know this is happening, they'll put a stop to it immediately. And I realised within seconds of sitting down, he kindly gave me an audience. Within seconds of sitting down, talking to this parliamentarian, who, by the way, was quite a senior parliamentarian, like he was chairing a number of committees, that sort of thing. And I could see by the look on his face that he'd heard it all before, and B, he didn't give a shit. And that's how it is. We've got no problem with it. And I mean, some of the super brazen examples, a couple of ones, he sort of shook his head a bit at those. But overall, he really had no problem with it, and he tried to, maybe you've misunderstood it. You don't really understand it. Why are you a lawyer, Billy Bob? Are you a professor of law? So he tried to sort of poo-poo it and say, well, you don't know what you're on about, and how do you know, and this sort of thing. But at that time, I'd had a decent amount of experience in contract law, so I did know what I was talking about, and I did know what a subversion of the rule of law looked like, or due legal process rather looked like. So he didn't care, and the state parliamentarian I went to see, who by the way, took me into the parliamentary dining room and gave me a very nice lunch, and sumptuous affair it was, and he was very polite and very pleasant, but I could tell he wasn't in the slightest bit interested. That's how it is. That's going on. Maybe we could, if we kicked up a big fuss, we could stop it, but we'll slow it down. But really, that's kind of how we want things to be. We've got no problem with it, so they were quite happy that there was a large transfer of wealth from men to women for ideological reasons and nothing else. That they were quite okay with that, and they liked the idea, I think, that they could leave their wives or partners at any tick of the clock. But they were in a different scenario. When a politician gets divorced, or certainly the ones I saw, they're very well looked after. They suddenly get all these mysterious consultancies. They get put on all these extra committees, and their ex-wife is given a well-paid job in a quango. So she decides that she doesn't want to get alimony or child support or something from the politician. She's just given this very well-paid job, with lots of travel and benefits and car and all the other. So she doesn't kick up a fuss. She doesn't, and he gets to see the children wherever he wants to, and then she's very well looked after. So within, he maybe he's got to give up 75% of his wealth to his ex-wife, but within a couple of years he's made that up plus some, with all the help and the extra bits and pieces that he gets. So politicians and those folks that either agreed with it or didn't want to oppose it or went along with it, they were looked after. They were effectively immune from the consequences of that. The ordinary middle class dude on his fixed salary was torn to pieces. He was financially obliterated. But these politicians weren't, and I think if they suffered the full the full consequences of it, then they may have viewed things differently, but they'd purchased or acquired immunity for themselves, and therefore, a bit like globalization, they're immune from the consequences of it. And as long as they're able to practice that immunity, then and benefit from that immunity, then they kind of don't care. And that was the early sort of thing when I realized the politicians didn't give a shit, and that sort of surprised me. Now, coming to the legal studies side of it, the view that the law, and this goes back to the 1619 project, and really all the activism, we're awash with oppression of women and violence against women. Racism is everywhere. Hitler, all this sort of stuff. All of it, climate change. All of it's invented. It's all an invented apocalyptic thing, and it's used to along with the equal outcomes. The outcomes between black and white equal. They're not. Racism. Outcomes between men and women equal. No. Misogyny. Outcomes with the climate. CO2 and so on. So it's this view is permeated, again, many Jewish legal scholars, in many of them, and this really shits me. The Jewish diaspora and the activists, they carry on like crazy about, look at how the law was usurped and perverted in Nazi Germany just so they could get at the Jews. It's terrible. We can't allow that to happen again. And I watch Jewish judges doing exactly the same thing as the Nazi judges did. Except this, though, they're doing it to Christian Gentile men. The Jewish judges are today doing it, and believing they're virtuous in doing it. We're changing society for the better, and yet they'll scream about what the Nazi judges did, and they're doing the same fucking thing. I don't understand it. Why have they not learned from the past? Why have they not learned that the rule of law applied equally to all, regardless whether they're Jewish or man or woman or whatever, equally to all? And due legal process in court, you can't go and accuse someone of something unless you can back it up with evidence. Then the rules of evidence and so on. That is the biggest protection we have to our rights as citizens, our legal rights, our constitutional rights. It is all protected in that. As soon as you change it for ideological reasons, in order to create some imaginary fucking equal outcome nirvana, then all of us are losing our rights. Now, today they may be going after Christian white Gentiles, but once they've torn all the rules down and all the laws down, then one day it's going to turn on them. And then what are they going to do? The law and evidence. No, too fucking bad, buddy. That's all gone. So on this matter of what's taught in the legal studies, activism is the way. Your job as lawyers, this is being taught in the colleges, your job as lawyers, when you go out into the big wide world and finish your course, your job is to create social change. It's to produce equal outcomes on race, gender, and climate change, social justice, climate justice, yada, yada, yada. Now, I don't know how many of those students sucker for that stuff. If you've come from a family that can afford to stump up $250,000 for your studies, you don't come from a poor family, but equally, you may come from a family that's like, your mother's the vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion on being paid $1 million a year, some bullshit job in some company. Diversity, equity, inclusion jobs pay most part pay better than being a senior engineer building a bridge or a road. I mean, that's how insane things are today. So maybe your parents are diversity, equity, inclusion officers, but that type of legal training, particularly when they draft low IQ people into these courses, the women and black lesbians, all that sort of thing, then they see activism as the purpose. Now, if you listen to a lot of the people in, say, Twitter pre Mr. Musk's takeover, there's a lot of brown and black women in there who've done legal studies because they think they can change society so that everyone else in society is wrong. They're right, of course, and they can change society so that everyone's equal and they'll never suffer discrimination or racism or this or that or transphobia or something. So they think legal studies gives them some sort of a power over others. you know, I don't know. I think it's quite a childlike sort of view of things. You know, some kid walks around with a switchblade knife, thinking, yeah, that'll show those bums. Yeah, it's almost like that, but in a legal sense. You know, how about not being so? How about not having such a big chip on your shoulder? Maybe that'll help. But nonetheless, so these studies is that the law should be and must be used to effect and cement and further social change, and the laws as they exist prevent social change. They're white man's law, Hitler law, Nazi law, Nazi. So if you want to have facts and evidence and the rule of law and then you're a fucking Nazi. And so only by moving those things out of the way can we just introduce ideological arbitrary law. I mean, it's not really arbitrary because it's producing social justice, it's producing equal outcomes, it's producing equality, it's producing equity. It's making sure those damn white Christian oppressors are brought to book for their evil fascism. So now I don't know how many of the kids are really out there like this. Many are affected. They go and work at NGOs, they go and work for Twitter. You know, that there is a huge market at the moment for those who want to hate on white people, want to hate white people and take away white people's legal rights. There is a huge market, a ravenous globalist market for that. So there's plenty of opportunities for these people to go and work in legal aid, diversity inclusion officers, legal advisors to human resource departments. I mean, the list goes on, NGOs and so on and so on, departments of justice. I mean, look at all the activists that are in the departments of justice, you know, that are in the attorney general's offices around New York and that sort of thing. So, and you can see from the quality of the documents these people put up that it's piss poor quality, which suggests that they've got a lot of young, low IQ people that have been radicalized through the legal studies of the university system. So, so this is the concern that I think we have going forward, is that the proportion of lawyers that actually care about the law, or think the law is even relevant, is declining quite rapidly. Not that they aren't out there, they are, but whereas you count on the majority of lawyers that you say would later on become judges, the majority of them would look at the rule of law. That's not the case. And if you want any confirmation of that, just look at the or evidence to support it rather, look at the confirmation hearings of judges going through the US Congress. I'm staggered that those people even made it into, you know, like a law clerk, let alone a fucking judge. I mean, some of them are like, wow, you've got to be kidding me. But there they are. So you've got this low IQ black lesbian activist who's sitting on the case. Now, the second thing that is really concerning is that because the clerks and the whole court apparatus is now activist, or in many places completely activist, wall to wall, they'll make sure that if there's a case involving a black lesbian, that the black lesbian judge will get the case. Now, does the litigant know? Does the straight white Christian litigant know that she's a black lesbian activist? Probably not, but they're openly putting activist judges to hear cases where their activism perfectly aligns with the case, and thus producing extremely prejudicial outcomes. You've been with Tastus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.